This is Frank Consella with the Crested Butte is Home podcast, and this week's guest is a relative newcomer to Crested Butte, but he fits right in because he is an adventurer and he likes to do things differently, and he's created a career where one doesn't really exist. And so he's been to the North Pole, the South Pole, the top of Mount Everest, and countless other expeditions and adventures. So welcome Eric Larsen to the podcast, and let's get on to that interview. My guest this week is Eric Larsen. So Eric, tell us a little bit about yourself and where you're from.
A little bit about myself, where I'm from. I'm originally from the Midwest. I grew up in a somewhat small town in Wisconsin. Spent most of my childhood kind of outside, riding my bike and camping. However many decades later, I'm pretty much still riding my bike and camping. So I'd like to think I'm a pretty interesting and evolving person, but honestly, not much has changed in my life. But I spent a lot of my time in the Midwest. I moved out to Colorado about 10 years ago and was living in Boulder, and then moved to Crested Butte. I guess on a professional level, my focus is long, freezing cold sufferfests.
Okay.
But realistically, I just like being outside. I like doing unique, original things. I like riding my bike. I like camping. I like spending time with my family.
There you go. Okay. So you just said that your job, whatever you want to call it, explorer or whatever. So I'm not aware of any college degrees in that. So how'd you get into that? And has that been like since you got out of high school or college or whatever? Or?
Well, growing up in the Midwest back in the day, the world was a lot different, and it's hard to really relate to everything looking at things now where we have athletes and ambassadors and social media, and we have all this awareness of adventure and organizations. And not that there weren't things like YMCA camps back then, but there wasn't just this culture of adventure and doing things differently, especially in the Midwest. I love being from the Midwest, and so for me, it was just kind of following my interests. And I went to college and studied things that just got me outside. I was a biology major, environmental studies.
Was that in the Midwest as well?
Yeah, in Minnesota. And then, just try to take classes that got me outside, whether it was like forest ecology or winter ecology or whatever. I was just trying to find ways in which I could be outside. And for me, I spent my summers working in bike shops and racing bikes, and would always try to plan with my friends some sort of adventure trip, canoe trip in northern Minnesota. And so when I got out of college, I was just trying to figure out how I could spend more time outside. And so I got a job as a backcountry ranger in Alaska, and then did a bunch of other kind of like guiding jobs. I was a whitewater guide actually in Colorado in the early 90s. I stumbled into dog mushing as well. And it's kind of with dog sledding, dog mushing that I got into some of my first kind of real winter style expeditions way back in the day. But it's still, trying to pursue this dream of doing expeditions. I had read a lot about adventure as a kid and historical expeditions, and always really enjoyed camping trips. So I remember being out, on a 2-week trip in high school and being like halfway through the trip and being like, "How this is awesome! I got to be out here another week."
Was it solo too?
No, it was with a group. Okay. It was with a group, and so I had kind of always had this interest in expeditions and was trying to move towards trying to do these trips, but just didn't have any tools to be able to figure it all out. And so I just got different jobs in different places and got very discouraged at times. Kind of started working as a teacher, teaching environmental study or environmental ed, and was working on my master's degree for a while and did that, and still was trying to get back into expeditions. And I know this is rambling on, but it's not. I wish it was a simple answer. Like I just woke up one day and then this is what happened. But it's been a long process of just trying to figure things out, how to do this stuff, how to get skills. And eventually landed back in northern Minnesota and was working for a dog sled expedition company. And so we were doing expeditions in the Canadian subarctic, and then we would design an education program along with that. And then from there, kind of transitioned into expeditions more on the full-time side. But I was still working in bike shops in my 30s, cleaning chimneys, bartending, you name it.
Sure.
So
ski town jobs, but you weren't in a ski town.
Yeah, exactly.
Huh, okay, cool. So give us a quick rundown of some of your expeditions just so people kind of have a feeling for what we're talking about.
Yeah, like I said, long, freezing cold Summerfest. I'm kind of drawn to the process of these bigger, more polar style expeditions. So initially it was with dog sledding up in the Canadian Arctic, and then planning trips to the North Pole. So I did a summer expedition to the North Pole in 2006. Skied to the South Pole in 2008, did another expedition to the South Pole, North Pole, on top of Everest all in a year in 2010. And then in 2014, we did another trip to the North Pole that most realistically will be the last in history. And then in between then, a lot of other guided expeditions to Antarctica and all over the place.
Why do you say that one will be the last in history?
Well, the ice is changing pretty dramatically in the Arctic, more so than a lot of other places. And as a result, the logistics network is kind of shutting down. So while it's physically possible to still potentially do an expedition there, it's impossible to have any sort of logistical support. So you can't get there, you can't get picked up.
As far as the planes can't land.
Exactly.
Because there's the permafrost is thawed.
It's not land. It's sea ice. So it's ice floating on water, okay. And so the ice has just become thinner. It's more unpredictable. The season is shorter. You've got less bigger flat areas in which to land a plane. So there's a variety of factors that kind of contribute to that.
Got it. All right, got it. So these are all cold expeditions, and I love winter more than almost anybody but I also love coming back to a warm house or a ski hut or whatever. So how do you manage the cold day in, day out? And I don't think people realize, even here in Crested Butte, if you go for a ski tour and it's minus 20, you're tired at the end of the day, more so than if it's, normal temperatures. How do you manage that?
Well, one of the reasons why I'm drawn to the cold is because it does require extra effort. And so that's something that's really intriguing to me. And so managing your body, managing your systems requires what I call a lot of thoughtfulness. And so it's kind of constantly being on top of all your systems, from the clothes you're wearing to what you're eating to how you're packing your pack or your sled or whatever it is. And so that's the thing for me that I focus very much on. We build a lot of systems into that, what our travel schedule is like, how we're eating. Nutrition is a huge part of our travel and staying warm. And like I said, just this overall thoughtfulness. The thing in which I've seen people get into the most problems is when they feel in control of the environment or relaxed to the point of I've been in this situation 100 times before, but is the wind from the same direction? Are they at the same level of fitness? Did they sleep poorly the night before? All those factors. And so it's kind of this constant checking in and making adjustments, not in a hyper way where you're wasting energy, but just kind of in this thoughtful, constantly adjusting, trying to minimize the peaks and the troughs throughout the day, and then having those systems in place so that you can get into a more comfortable situation, hopefully at some point.
Got it. Gotcha. What just to continue that conversation, so we'll talk about maybe a little bit of the typical gear that you're talking about then, how big are your sleds, how big is that, in terms of the gear, it's actually pretty simple. However, it does depend a little bit on what the objectives are that we're trying to do. So if we're doing a big trip that's kind of called unsupported, which we'd be carrying all of our supplies for a couple months, then we have 9-foot long lightweight Kevlar sleds. We're bringing tents, stoves, fuel, food, which is about 2.5 pounds per person per day. And then, also emergency kit, first aid kit, all that kind of stuff as well. So it's quite honestly, it's not a lot of different things that we would take. I always kind of laugh at myself when I go out for a weekend trip. The amount of clothes that I take for a weekend is pretty much the same thing that I'll take for a 2-month expedition. We're not
bringing a lot of extra things. We have, an extra pair of long underwear or whatever. That's it. The only difference is kind of the food and the fuel.
Right.
And so we're bringing a lot more of that. And so that's kind of how it expands in and out.
Got it. So run us through the typical planning of an expedition from start to finish. Like, how long is that process? And I don't know, I find that part interesting. 'Cause that's a big part of it.
Yeah, I mean, I love planning trips. I love kind of unrolling a map of the world, looking at a place, and just wondering what it'll be like. And so that's kind of how it starts. It's like, and for me, it's more about where people haven't been. And so trying to find those last corners of the world where maybe somebody hasn't gone yet, or trying to understand a little bit about those who've come before me, and how can I make that journey in that place more unique, different.
Sure.
And that's, for me, a really big part of planning an expedition is how can I do things that are interesting to myself, which often means trying to do something that hasn't been done before. So, kind of once I have that nailed down, then it's just doing a lot of research on the environment, understanding a little bit more about that place, the conditions, what kind of logistics are there. And then a big part of it is then kind of training and getting all that equipment. Back in the day, we would take 3 years to do a big trip. So when we did our summer expedition to the North Pole, nobody had ever done a human-powered expedition to the North Pole in summer, so we didn't know anything about the conditions. We didn't know what kind of boots we could wear up there. We didn't know how to carry our gear. So we were like developing kayaks that could be pulled like sleds, and getting different kayaks and cutting out the tops of them and putting runners on them and all this stuff, and loading them up with our gear. And this was when I was living in northern Minnesota, floating them in Lake Superior. And so there's a lot of that process that goes into it, which takes a lot of time. And then we would travel up in the Arctic and do another training trip, and just try to test out some of our theories. And so that process was like 3 years long. Additionally, and equally important, is the fundraising aspect of it, because the logistics costs in these trips are off the charts.
Right.
If I would be a mountaineer or a skier, I would be psyched because I could take 10 grand and go live in Pakistan for a month or 2 months like a king. 10 grand doesn't even get me to the starting point. Right. With all the special chartered planes and everything else. 10 grand is like one sled for me, So, but it's a fun process. It's a lot of trial and error. I think now, as time has evolved, that time frame is a little shorter. Because I have more experience in a lot of these places. There's easier access to information now than there used to be as well. And so it's kind of constantly evolving. Still, I'm going out and doing training trips. Like I have a trip planned in the Gobi Desert, and I was over in Mongolia maybe a year and a half ago or something, just kind of riding my bike over there, seeing what it would be like. And to me, that's been... that those things are a huge advantage, because not only does it allow you to test gear, but it also gives you a better understanding of what that environment is like. And, and not that I'm nervous about doing anything in Mongolia in terms of like physical danger, falling through the ice or getting eaten by a polar bear or an avalanche. But I will say, like, when you're doing things that are unknown, and unknown either in general or just unknown to you, like that fear can be relatively high. And as soon as you start ticking off some of those things that you understand better, your kind of level of concern can drop dramatically, and then you can focus on that task a lot better.
Sure. No, that's that way for anything.
Anything, yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't even have to be outdoors. It's
totally.
Just starting a business or something.
Yeah, and I will say that's one of the things for me is with expeditions that I think has been a really great gift, is this idea of kind of risk and uncertainty, and understanding that there's a process to dealing with that. And it doesn't have to be a big expedition. It could be anything. But when you start doing those same steps in whatever aspect of your life, you're like, wow, I didn't realize I could do that, but it's just a process.
Sure. Yeah. You keep saying we, so how many people are on these expeditions with you?
Yeah, I'm split personality, maybe that's why I say we. It just depends. I mean, I've done solo expeditions. There are aspects to that are really great. It's a lot easier to make decisions as one person. But for me, I really like working with teams, and so it just depends on the trip. I've got a great partner that I've done a lot of expeditions with who lives in Boulder. He's a mountain guide, and so we kind of collaborate on different projects a lot, and then we kind of go do our own things. And then other times I just put different teams together depending on people I know. For me, personality is a big thing.
Yeah.
Just because we're in these very intense situations for extended amount of time.
Of course.
And so more important than just a physical skill is the ability to work through problems and communicate and, work together as a team.
Yeah. And you started to touch on this, but I wanted to ask, so many expeditions have been done. So how are you finding new angles to get people and probably most importantly sponsors interested in what you're doing?
That's a good question. And I think adventure is evolving over time. And for me, my goal is to push the leading edge of adventure. And I don't necessarily go out to try to do the most badass thing. I'm just trying to follow my own personal interests. And a lot of that is based on just my own kind of creative thoughts, as well as bigger ideas. And so for me, I've always been very focused on the environmental aspects of what I do. And so kind of communicating about these bigger ideas about global warming, wilderness or whatever it is kind of paramount. And so after that, it's just trying to find ways in which I can challenge myself. So it's kind of understanding the expedition world or the adventure world. Mm-hmm. I think it's a little bit of a double-edged sword because, you can get an adventure with all these adjectives in front of it just to claim to be a first.
Yeah.
So there's an aesthetic, I feel like, to it as well. But ultimately, it's just, for me, just trying to follow my interests and trying to be original in whatever way and push my own comfort levels in my sport.
Uh-huh.
But then I do a lot of other smaller things too. I mean, I love bike packing. I love riding my bike. I started doing these totally arbitrary things called state-a-thons, which is just kind of actually another idea because I think a lot of people are focused on these kind of epic, iconic things, climbing Mount Everest, hiking the AT Trail. There's a lot of incredible adventures in our backyard.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take much to find something that's unique and original here. So, for example, and that's how I started out. I mean, growing up in Wisconsin, we didn't have mountains. We didn't have anything.
Yeah.
So my buddy and I, we'd take our canoe and we'd canoe down this little creek, and then we'd reach the end of it, and we'd have to portage through a town, and then we'd keep going, And so people are honking horns as we're portaging a canoe down Main Street. We loved it, and we were just making it up.
Uh-huh.
And so that was how I got started in adventures, and I think that's an important thing to remember as we kind of, myself included, get focused on these iconic things. We see other people on social media going to the same spots, to get the same picture. Adventure is everywhere. That's kind of an idea and thought that I had. And so we did a trip across Colorado where we biked across the eastern part of Colorado, hiked through the flat tops, and pack rafted the Colorado River to the Utah border. I had driven I-70, down from Rifle all through Grand Junction. I was like, I wonder what it would be like to be out there.
That, yeah.
And millions of people have done it, and there's guided trips on some of that, but I just wanted to know what it was like.
Yeah.
Plus, biking through eastern Colorado, I mean, I would never have gone out there on purpose to go there, but I loved it. I mean, we were just going through all these cornfields, rolling. It was incredible. And so it was just a really neat way in which to see the state, see areas that I wouldn't normally go, and have a really challenging adventure that was unique to me. So I got to put all my little planning aspects into that as well.
Yeah.
So I've been doing those in a couple other states. I did one in Wisconsin last year, and then I'm actually heading to New York to do another one. Because when I was doing it in Colorado, I was like, man, this is pretty hard. I mean, we had days that were like 7 a.m. to 11 at night, just every day. I mean, it was hard.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, this is hard. But it was also really fun. And so I'm kind of have this super arbitrary goal to try to do those in all 50 states at some point.
That'd be cool.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah. And again, it's just for me, following my interests, trying to be original in what I do for the most part. Mm-hmm. That's just my line where I draw it.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. In this week's Crested Butte Real Estate Minute, I wanted to talk about a couple of listings that I have. One is a 3-bedroom, 2.5-bath townhome in downtown Crested Butte, and it's just a block away from the bus stop straight up to Mount Crested Butte to go skiing. This is an awesome, awesome townhome, and you should check that one out. And I also have a 2-bedroom, 2-bath listed up on the mountain with super low dues and a garage. It's perfect for a local. And you can find both of those by going to CrestedButteRealEstateAgent.com and go to the property tab, and you can find all of my listings there. And you can also always contact me as well by visiting CrestedButteRealEstateAgent.com. My name's Frank Consella. This is my podcast, and let's get back to the interview. Well, I want to go back to, you mentioned the environmental angle. This is something I've been thinking about a lot. So the outdoor industry kind of has this crazy place in this because, all our stuff comes from China and all this other stuff. And then people fly around the world and then they're like, oh, and by the way, fight climate change.
Yeah, totally.
So it's a little bit of a weird thing. So how do you reconcile all this travel and also trying to be green and pay attention to what you're doing?
It's tough. I don't know if I do. For me, I would say that I got into expeditions because of the environment. I didn't necessarily, I loved adventure, but I didn't necessarily be like, hey, I'm going to be a pro athlete. I was just trying to find ways in which to teach people about the places in which I was traveling and what was going on there. And so it's a delicate balance, and I think part of what my mission is now, and it's evolved over time. I've worked on the political side of things. I've worked on kind of more of the actual strategies as well. And I've kind of shifted my focus to basically creating just awareness of cold, as silly as that sounds.
Sure.
Because I think cold gets a bad rap. And so when people talk about global warming, they're like, big deal. The environment, can be a little bit warmer. I don't like to be cold.
Right.
And in reality, cold is a really important part of a healthy planet.
Right.
And so for me, I kind of have this focus on that, but when I look at what I'm doing, it's kind of personal and global. So we all need to look at our own individual actions. I think as individuals, we're not going to solve the problem on our own,
right.
But we have to be mindful of all the things that we do, and one individual can have a big impact when you add it up together. So I think as individuals, we need to be super mindful of all the things we're doing. We're flying all over the place, so buying carbon offsets, you turning off your lights. I mean, these things seem so mundane, but they're actually a huge impact. Electricity and cars are the number 1 and 2 producers of carbon emissions.
Right.
And so focusing on those in individual ways can have a huge impact, and then simultaneously trying to kind of push the national conversation towards these bigger policies, which really need to happen. So it's kind of a bottom up and top down. And so for me, my expeditions are really focused on that top down conversation on an individual level. I'm trying to do my little part, which if you look at it in a big picture, it doesn't seem like much.
Right.
But it's important for all of us. I mean, how many times even just something as simple as going to fill up a gas and you see all the aluminum cans in the trash at the gas station. I mean, it's crazy. Recycling is such an easy thing to do, especially in Colorado.
The aluminum is unfortunately that's changed too. The plastic doesn't have a market anymore.
Yeah. I mean, it's all evolving, and it's important for us to stay on top of it. I think equally important for me is just this idea of this bigger conversation, which is these places are changing pretty dramatically. So, quite honestly, when I do a lot of media stuff, it's is it really melting like they say it is?
Right.
Because these places traditionally have been so arbitrary to us that doesn't affect us in a very visceral way. And so it's just trying to create this connection to these places that a lot of people don't really understand. Yeah. Antarctica, the Arctic, they're just very abstract. And so, on any given day, I struggle with what I'm doing. Is it good? Is it bad? But I keep going forward.
Right.
I don't know if that's gonna move the needle or not, but I'm still trying.
Right.
But I do think, just per your point, it is important for all of us to look at our individual actions as well.
Yeah.
Because I do think that gets glossed over a little bit.
Yeah, it's easy.
And I think the outdoor industry is evolving, much more in that direction, and it has. But you kind of see these waves of stuff come through, like the plastics thing is big now with outdoor retailers specifically, and obviously climate is big in a lot of capacities, but it's still an ongoing conversation.
Well, why don't you tell us a few particularly memorable stories, especially ones maybe you haven't talked about a whole lot. I'm sure you've got a ton. So
yeah, well, I feel like I've forgotten most of the things, which is probably better. I got to tell you, a lot of what I do is pretty boring at times. Like you're just going all day long staring at nothing.
Right.
I mean, I was just down in Antarctica last year. It was just me. I was just in a whiteout all day for days on end. And that was almost the end of my rope, I feel like.
Uh-huh.
I mean, imagine being in a ping pong ball from like 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. skiing in one direction.
Were you just staring at your GPS, basically?
I have a compass. Actually, It was the first time this ever happened. I'll use a compass to navigate on a short-term level. Just like this, and then I'll use a GPS at the end of the day, but I just wear it in a bracket and looking down, and I just look down at that needle. And it was so bad, my neck cramped up, which I've never had happen. I mean, it was crazy. It was really probably one of the worst experiences of my life. Yeah, so in terms of I think it's really cool to be in those situations where there's nobody else around and travel for not just a day or a week, but weeks and months. Not seeing anybody.
Yeah.
Being on Everest with nobody else on the mountain was incredible.
How'd you pull that off?
Well, we climbed in the fall.
Okay.
So, that was just there's nobody that's climbing in the fall. I think there's a team going this year, but that was 2010. Nobody's sounded in the fall since.
Yeah.
Or there's been a couple attempts. So, again, it's just, I'm really drawn to these big, wild places. And so being a small person in that is kind of overwhelming, but it's also pretty awesome too.
How do you deal with being away from your family and potentially being in danger for long periods of time?
Yeah, that is interesting, because when I started doing expeditions, I didn't have any kids. And so it's almost easier to be just focused on yourself.
Yeah, of course.
And so now, for example, last year I was gone 5 months out of the year. And it's hard. And, 5 months for me is a fraction of my life. 5 months for my 4-year-old is a big part of her whole existence.
Right.
So there's a lot of changes. And then my wife, she's a single parent while I'm gone. And so it's not easy at all. And it continues to get more difficult and more stressful for me. We communicate regularly through Garmin and Reach, so I know what's going on, but it's not the same as being around. And for me, I love being a dad. I love having a family. I love being here in Crested Butte. So it's something that I still am trying to square.
Yeah.
And I don't know what it is. And, I kind of call it the cost of adventure. And the cost of adventure is, not being home. And I used to think that was directly affecting my kids, but they're going to be what they're going to be regardless. And so that biggest cost of adventure on everything is me, because it's really affecting my passion and where my goals are. And that's a normal part of life, but I've been laser focused on this direction of expeditions. And so to now feel this other thing over here, which I'm not saying is bad, it's awesome.
Yeah.
It's just weird. And so I'm kind of in this middle ground right now where I don't know what I'm doing. I've been going this way. That's the path. It's well worn,
Right.
And especially when you're going down a path that there's roadblocks every step of the way. People are telling you can't do it. There's not a clear cut way to do it.
Yeah.
You're in the ski industry. You've got ski hills. You got manufacturers. You've got magazines. You've got movies. It's pretty clear cut.
Right.
It's hard. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of effort that goes into being a skier or whatever.
Yeah.
But for me, it's kind of having to make everything up every day. And so it's been hard, but it's been my focus. And so now it's just interesting to not necessarily have that same laser focus because of my family, which is, I think, a good thing, actually.
Right. Well, and that goes back to one of your earlier points where on these expeditions you have to be focused all the time. So you gotta still gotta like pay attention to that part of it.
Totally. And the physical and the mental, and you probably understand this with a lot of things you've done, but the physical and the mental, they're not separate. They're together, and they really impact one another. And also, when you don't have a lot of other stimuli around, that mental thing, your mind can turn on you in a really bad way.
Yep.
And so as physically challenging these things are, the mental aspect can be more difficult. And part of that is overwhelming, but part of that is also awesome, is because when you can work through that, it's very empowering. But for me, that's like a month and a half. Skier drops in, they're in that right then and there.
Right.
For me, it's this long chess game that I got to play for a long time, and then it's either I get through it or I'm screwed.
Yeah. You moved to Crested Butte fairly recently. Why'd you pick Crested Butte?
Well, we had been coming here camping for quite some time and riding our bikes. First, as I said earlier, I love to ride my bike in whatever capacity. And so we had just come here and camped and rode a lot. And so like pretty much everybody else in Colorado, the first moment you come to this town, you're like, yes, this is awesome. But I lived in northern Minnesota for about 10 years in a town a little smaller than Crested Butte and probably more remote, and I loved it. So I'm a small town guy, and being in Boulder is great on the outdoor industry kind of business side, but I'm not a Boulder guy. I'm not a Front Range guy. I'm not even really cool enough for Colorado in general. And so for me, it was just kind of biding my time till we could find a way to get out. And so I love small town life. And I think for us, it worked out perfectly with our kids. And we've talked about this. I think, being in a mountain town as a younger person is awesome. I'm not really a bro, so like I don't fit in with that group. Not that that's bad, but like I'm interested in a lot of things. But I think for us, being here as a family has been a super rewarding experience, like with the community and obviously just the access to all this wilderness with our kids, which is really important for me. Not that they necessarily need wilderness, but just this opportunity to be creative, do things outside, not have a lot of boundaries, feel somewhat safe while still pushing their own personal envelopes. Like that's all part of it.
Yeah.
And also, quite honestly, like winter. I mean, Front Range winter is the worst thing in the entire world.
I usually pack a pair of shorts when I visit Denver in January because it might be 60.
It might be 60, yeah. And you get snow and then it melts like 2 days later. And so it's just pointless. So for me, I really enjoy that winter where it's full on winter every day. Because I like Nordic skiing, I like alpine skiing, I like going out and just winter camping, I like exploring, on snowshoes, I like ice fishing. I just like a lot of winter things, and I like that direct access. I don't want to have to drive even 15 minutes to go do something. I want to just do it right out my back door. So that's it's always been an important part of my life. And so, I've always lived in very small, remote towns right on the edge of the wilderness.
We check those boxes. So
totally.
What are some local adventures that you've done here that people might resonate with?
I'm on my bike almost every day. So the mountain biking here really suits me. It was funny. I was in Big Al's and I heard one of the guys talking to a tourist like, 401, but people only ride that, locals only ride that like once a summer. And I was like, I ride the 401 every week. And I just like the, kind of adventure aspect of the riding here, where you're out in the backcountry and you get to see a lot of the terrain. I love being outside, so I'm on my bike almost every day. My wife Maria and I are pretty much out on our bikes. Do a lot of stuff with the kids. I mean, my daughter's 4. Maria and her just hiked up Mount CB on Monday. Long Lake's right up here. Up on Washington Gulch, the 403 is right over here. So we do a lot of that stuff. And then I convinced my wife to pack raft down the Slate River with me this spring.
Nice.
Which was a little bit over her head, but it was still a fun little adventure. So I think most of my stuff around here is more focused on biking and just hanging out with the kids.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
I guess I was in my head, I was thinking more of like that, like those state adventures that you were talking about. If you had like a Gunnison County adventure where you took like 4 days to, like go way back in the West Elk, like really remote part of the county.
When I lived in northern Minnesota, we did that stuff, and we would bike, and then we would this was before pack rafts, we just inflated like kids' inner tubes. But quite honestly, like traveling so much, I'm just psyched to be around and just do these shorter trips and also more family stuff. So it's kind of just like, for me here, it's like training, which is riding my bike or doing some hikes.
Yep.
And then family time. So I'm a focused, boring dude, and so I need to expand a little bit more. But right now I'm just psyched to like look at trees and see the mountains, and count hummingbirds at the hummingbird feeder or whatever it is.
So one last Crested Butte question: Does this location make it harder for you to do your job, or easier, do you think, overall?
Most of my job is not in Colorado.
Right.
That said, I'm working on trying to get some more winter camping things and kind of polar courses based in Gunnison on Blue Mesa and here in Crested Butte. So that's much easier. I think, I do a lot of photo and video work as well. It's super easy to have all this. And I just think for my peace of mind, it's a lot better for me to be here. So, I don't really think about easy or hard in anything I do. I think pretty much everything I do has like a cost and is difficult. And so for me, it's all about quality of life. Yeah. And the quality of life that we have here is off the charts. My wife and I talk about it every day. Every day is just like, can you believe that we were able to do this? Can you believe we were just up at Lake Irwin on Monday afternoon hanging out. We just got a pizza from Mikey's Pizza, drove up there with the kids. Here we are. Yeah. It was awesome. And it's just a little afternoon thing. So I think that's how I measure my life, is in quality more than anything. And I would say that our quality of life here is above outstanding.
We'll start to wrap it up. Where can people learn more about you?
Anywhere they want. You can just Google my name. But I have a website, ericlarsenexplorer.com, Facebook, Instagram, EL Explorer, Twitter, that kind of stuff.
That's all. Just look up Eric Larsen with an E.
Yep, that's right. Thanks. Yeah, most people get it wrong, but that's fine.
Easy to do.
Yeah.
Anything you wish I would have asked, or that you just want to get off your chest?
Well, I got to say, I think for me, being in CB is just an awesome thing. So I'm new to the community. I feel very lucky to be here. I also feel like I've made more friends and acquaintances in 1 year in Crested Butte than 8 years in Boulder. Yeah. Big surprise. I think for me, I think, like I said, adventure is everywhere. For me, it's a process. I'm still trying to figure it all out moving forward. Yeah. Planning big trips, planning small trips, and that's about it.
What's the next trip you have planned? I don't think that's come up, actually.
Yeah, actually. So, I'm heading to New York State to do another state-a-thon. And then I've got a trip to the Arctic Refuge that I'm working on with the Sierra Club. And so that should be, I'm really excited about it because they're very environmentally focused, kind of back to my roots of my expeditions. And then a bunch of guided adventures up in the Arctic, Greenland Traverse again in the spring. And some of my training courses, and then also working on another big Arctic Ocean project as well.
Cool. Last question, who else should I interview?
Man, I don't know a ton of people in town. Do you know Andrew Sandstrom?
Name's familiar.
He's like the tourism guy. He's helped me out a lot. He's like one of the nicest guys. He is awesome. He actually is just helping out with his film crew. If I was a millionaire, I would hire him. I would just to be my guy. I don't know what he would do, but he can do everything. Yeah.
Cool.
So he's a great guy. I'll see if I can drum up anything else in my brain.
Well, we got one. That's all we really need.
Cool.
So, awesome. Well, thanks so much for taking some time, and hopefully see you out and about.
Yeah, no problem. Let me know if you're ever going riding.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Crested Butte is Home podcast. You can find all the episodes by visiting CrestedButteIsHome.com or searching Crested Butte is Home on your favorite podcast player. Also, if you are on Facebook or Instagram, just look for Crested Butte is Home and you can find me there as well. Please share the podcast, and if you have any questions about real estate, as always, you can get in touch with me, Frank Consella, about that by visiting crestedbutteshome.com as well. And I'll see you again in a couple weeks with a brand new interview.